We had some health-related matters that we touched on this morning. We had George that has given us some insights into the lighter side of COVID, if I might call it that. And then we also had an interesting discussion on bladder management. Yes. And that actually brings us to the next session, where we have George that is qualified as a medical professional. And he shares his thoughts, as we all are aware of now, that by being on this webinar, we subscribe and have an interest into the Rolling Inspiration magazine. So George, thank you very much for your contribution, as I mentioned also. And you have touched on a very important aspect where decisions are made. And this morning we heard your example about when there is only a certain number of beds available in the ICU. I'm sure that someone has to make the decision as to who qualifies and who does not qualify at some stage to make access or to make use of any healthcare facility or equipment around that. And it's usually the medical professional that we rely on to make those informed decisions. But what inspired the article?
And what inspired the article? Why is it an important discussion to have? If we look at the social and formal media, you know, for everything from a newspaper article, TV, the news bulletin, right through to tweets and what have you. They're loaded with the challenges and problems regarding physical contact with COVID patients, such as personal protective equipment, sanitizing, fear of infection, and how to minimize the chances of infection. The media is also very focused on infrastructure, the availability of ICU beds, the availability of oxygen and ventilators, the availability of competent staff and that know how to use and operate the equipment. But when it comes to making life and death decisions, it appeared to me that there was very little understanding of how decisions that impact on the lives and deaths of people are made, and what impact such decision has on the emotions of the people that make them, and what assisting tools and support structures are there available to shift from subjective gut feel decisions to objective criteria-driven decisions. And these criteria, objective criteria decisions are designed, the tools are designed to relieve the emotional stress that comes with making these life and death choices. Because bear in mind that these choices have to be made many times a day, day after day after day. So the media, and particularly the informal media, the tweets and the Facebook comments and the like, can be brutal because people experience situations from their own perspectives. And more often than not, they believe that their own perspectives are 100% right. So they become hypercritical. And this article is an attempt to place the reader in the shoes of the decision maker, to better understand the tools and the processes that strive to find the best options under really dreadful situations. And I must stress this, there's no fairness at all in this situation. There's no fairness to everybody. There's no equal treatment to everybody. There's no justice for all. There's only choice governed by the principles of ethics. And because that choice is driven by emotion and passion, it will cause the decision maker to burn out with stress and anxiety and guilt. Because if you make a choice to put one person on a ventilator where there are 3 people that need the ventilator, you are almost effectively signing the death warrants of the other 2. And can you imagine the stress and the anxiety and the guilt that revolves around that? But even if we have these available tools and the support structures, the stress and the anxiety and guilt, it still exists, but hopefully it can be managed. I have many friends, personal friends, and children of friends that work on the front line. And I talk to them, and I've talked to their parents and so on, and I know what it does to them. And it is really a horrible situation that the general public just don't understand and don't appreciate. So this was the reason why I decided to write this article, to interview somebody that is at the rock face of this pandemic, but not just at the rock face, but also at the rock face of dealing with this pandemic with physically impaired people. That is Dr. V. Wilson of the Netcare Rehabilitation Hospital, with whom the interview was held.
It's amazing how you have the motivation behind the structure of the interview that you had, and the writing of the article. I can see what really has inspired you there. Yes, and it is a very important discussion to have, and as we have enjoyed your article also. But what would you like the readers to take away from this article?
Okay, let's go back in history. The COVID-19 pandemic, like the Spanish flu pandemic and the Black Plague and smallpox and all the other infection-related disasters in history, came totally out of the blue. It was an unexpected event that just suddenly was there. I mean, in December last year, many of us were on December holidays, and we heard about this funny little hoja floating around in China, and we said, okay, China is quite far away from here, so what? And then all of a sudden, that funny little hoja was here with us, and it impacted on our lives. And this out of the ordinary situation demanded out of the ordinary resources that just were not there. We were geared to deal with illnesses and events that reasonably could be expected. But this was this pandemic was a totally unreasonable pandemic. It didn't take into consideration the suffering that it caused. It just caused the suffering. So we were locked down to slow down the rate of this infection, to give the country an opportunity to build resources. But the building of resources was rife with controversy, differences in expert opinions, perceived incompetences, mismanagement, corruption, you name it, it was there. And with all the hype in the media caused by all of this, the trauma and the plight of the life and death decision makers just didn't feature. When the media covered health workers, the focus was on the infection and the infrastructure and the fear of becoming infected. But the processes of decision-making rarely received any attention. So decisions were criticized, and often with good reason, because inexperienced doctors and nurses, this is the first time for them. This is what we know in medical terminology as tiger country, because it's a highly dangerous country, and it's the first time we set foot in this country. Can you imagine going into the woods in Nepal or India without any weapons and walking around, and you know that there's tigers all around you, and you don't have any you don't have any means to protect yourself, and you don't have any experience about the situation, and you have to deal with it. This is what these doctors and nurses had to deal with. It was a totally brand new thing that came on them. And they often took decisions upon themselves, and they often made wrong decisions simply because they were not aware or did not have access to decision support tools and other support mechanisms. And in all of this, because remember, Rolling Inspiration is focused on persons with disabilities. So persons with disabilities felt particularly vulnerable because of a perception that they were not worthy of saving, that they were not as worthy of saving as able-bodied persons were. You know, just by way of example, one of the questions that I asked Dr. Wilson revolved around a quadriplegic in America that was turned down for ventilation because he was a quadriplegic. And that really created havoc amongst the members of the QuadPara Association, the worthiness of saving side of things. So I felt that there's a need to demonstrate that there are support tools, such as algorithms and checklists, that incorporate the principles of ethics and law, and also just plain common sense that help to make rational decisions, and that help to alleviate and relieve the anxiety of decision making. Because now it becomes more subjective, and it's not just, you're not just on your own. That there are also decision-making support teams, like psychologists and occupational therapists and social workers and the family members themselves that can guide you in saying, for example, my grandfather is 96 years old, and we don't want him on a ventilator. We want you just to support him and make his life as comfortable as possible, and see how it plays out. That sort of advice coming from children and grandchildren even. You need to talk to the families. Even if a healthcare worker is out in the sticks in a deep rural situation, they should not just decide, they should talk. They should share their thoughts, and very important, they should listen. And as I've alluded to just now, talk not just with colleagues, but especially also with the families. Explain their predicaments. Tell them that, we're sitting with the situation, we just don't have the support infrastructure available. And ask for the family's preferences. Talk to the people with the disabilities themselves, if they are still in a position that you can talk to them, so that you can understand not just the needs in terms of COVID, but that the healthcare workers can understand the needs of the person with a disability, the disability needs, the need to be turned, the need to have assistance with bladder and bowel and whatever other needs there are. And then also from the side of the patients and their families, talk to the healthcare workers and insist that they talk to you so that everybody can be on the same page of understanding. We must communicate with this situation, because through communication, we are all on the same page. We understand what the needs are. We understand what the demands are, and we understand what the limitations are in terms of resources and that sort of thing, so that we can take the blame and the aggression and the brutalness of accusations without understanding the background, that we can take that right out of the equation.
Well, George, that is valuable there. And I can see why it's not only one person that needs to make the decision, as well as why that the family or loved ones of the person who is the subject of the decision needs to be involved. Because I'm just thinking of a case where the patient would not be in a matter or would not be in a state or condition to communicate. And then the decision is still pending.
Yeah, Raven, just on that, but maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I'm the owner of a living will, but I'm considering tattooing on my chest, "Do not resuscitate."
I see, yes, but that is one way of communicating your will, ultimately, what you, yes. What your decision is. George, you have touched on the, as you mentioned, the criteria of a decision. There should be criteria for this decision in comparison to just a gut feeling or gut feel decision it's made. And recently, or towards the beginning of the lockdown period, we were informed actually through the Western Cape Network of Disability about a critical care decision tool that is developed and being used in the Western Cape. And on the SADA level, the South African Disability Alliance was asked to interrogate and to see whether that this critical care decision tool is actually accessible to all, first of all, and then also if everyone is aware of it and what the criteria is, and to make sure that people with disabilities would not be excluded, nor would they be discriminated against when that decision is taken. And I know it's borders on that where human rights end, or shall I say it borders to where the medical model and the social model and the human rights model of disability have a little bit of an overlap, or where there's some blurred lines. Yeah, would you just take us into the decision makers when it comes to the development of the critical care decision tools?
Raven, you know, there are many such tools, and to a large extent, I'm not just talking about the Western Cape one now, because that's one of many. I'm talking in broader principles. Yeah, the decision-making tool that you have to use if you are sitting in the ER of a hospital that is suddenly flooded with 100 COVID-19 cases, and the hospital only has 10 or 15 ICU beds available, and there's relative oxygen availability and so on. That is an acute triage situation. And you have to be very blunt and very direct, because it's a fast-moving situation. And you have to make rapid decisions, because you have to channel the people in the right directions. So you basically have to say, okay, this guy is in imminent danger of dying, so I need to get him in ICU. This guy is still breathing, he's got respiratory distress, but he's still breathing okay, so let's pass him on to oxygen. The following person is still breathing reasonably well, and he probably can be managed in a general ward or in an isolation facility. And this guy is showing hardly any symptoms, he's just been tested positively, so send him over. So it's a channeling situation, and the algorithm for such a situation is harsh and direct and short, because that's the demand of an ER center emergency room triage situation. Then you get to the person who is already, let's say, in ICU on a ventilator, and he's being ventilated, but he's not responding. And there are 3 or 4 other people knocking on the door for the use of the ventilator. Then you have to go through a process of saying, do we carry on with this person, or do we now take the decision to step him down and moving out and make him comfortable and provide the ventilator for somebody else that has a better chance of responding to the ventilator? And those questions have to involve the family, have to involve colleagues, have to involve psychologists, they have to involve ethical considerations, legal considerations, and often the legal considerations are in conflict with the ethical situations. You have to decide on the ethics of what is the best for this person versus the ethics of what is the best for the collective, the other people waiting in the passages. And so that sort of decision-making tool is much more complex, but also the criteria is almost like a tick box thing. You go through the pros and cons of the patient on the ventilator. You go through the pros and cons of the people waiting for the ventilator, and based on tick boxes and scoring methodologies, you decide who is the most likely to respond to the ventilator, to the ventilation, and you put that person on the ventilator. So you take the emotion and the heartache and so on, and look, the emotion and the heartache is still going to be there because you're playing with people's lives, and obviously it's going to influence you, but at least you have something tangible that should there be a court case, you can say we use this methodology because of the horrendous nature of the situation, and we made a decision based on that, and it is an internationally approved mechanism. So, you understand that these mechanisms are, and that's why there's so many of them, because they're written for specific situations.
I'm glad you mentioned that it's based on situations and not individuals or conditions. But George, this is and with your experience in the medical industry, and as a person with a disability, do you feel that people with a disability are at a disadvantage?
Yes, and then also how do they go about managing their disadvantage? Raven, people with disabilities are disadvantaged.
Yes.
Let me qualify the disadvantage. People with disabilities are just as disadvantaged as people with diabetes, because people with diabetes die quicker from COVID. Just as disadvantaged as people with emphysema, because they've got already underlying respiratory problems. Just as disadvantaged as people with high blood pressure, with chronic bronchitis, with asthma, and any other condition that will affect and influence the decision-making process, the tick boxes and the algorithms and the criteria. People with disabilities are as disadvantaged as the elderly and the infirm. And they're also as disadvantaged as, for instance, 3 young able-bodied persons competing for 1 ventilator. We're living in times of increased need and not enough resources. And very few people can claim to be not disadvantaged. I was assured, however, that paralysis by itself will not be taken as a specific disadvantage. So if the paralysis is let's for argument's sake say is a paraplegia and the person's lung functions and everything is fine, the chances are equal. But if the paralysis is a quadriplegia and it impacts on his respiration and he needs ventilatory support and so on, obviously he's going to be more disadvantaged, and this is going to be counted against him in an algorithm or a tick box situation, as I've mentioned before. But the disadvantage is not a unique disadvantage. It's a disadvantage that's shared by the other people that I mentioned, the diabetics, the emphysema patient, the chronic bronchitis, and the asthma patient, and all the others that I mentioned. So it's not a unique disadvantage. But to improve our care, what do we do about it? To improve care during a period of admission, and this goes for non-COVID admissions as well, not just for COVID admission. It's a great idea to be proactive and prepared beforehand. Make a list of your specific needs as well as your caregiver routines, and give the list and keep this list on your person. You know, you can keep it in a plastic sleeve or your wallet or whatever. And when you admit it, give the list to the admission person in the ward, so that it can be kept in your management file in the ward. Don't wait around for others to figure out how to help you. Be proactive and inform the people how to take care of you. Remember, persons with, for instance, quadriplegia are very few and far between. The routine nurse in a hospital ward aren't trained on a bowel routine or a bladder management routine, or a turning in bed routine to prevent bed sores. They're not just simply not trained with it because it comes up so infrequently. So you be proactive, have your list of needs, and give it to them and talk to them and inform them about it, because this helps people to understand how to take care of you. It also shows them that you've taken charge of your own disability and you're going to earn their respect in the process.
Great. Thank you so much, George. Raven just quickly had to jump off the webinar. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today and for giving us so many insights. We don't have any questions at the moment. We do have a comment from Emma, who said, based on the UK disability movement and our disability movement and academics, our South Africa triage tools was amended. I will be chatting about this in my presentation too. You guys can join her presentation at 12:30. I don't know if you have any concluding statements that you would like to make, George?
Yes. And it's basically just a repeat of what I've just said. If we sit around passively and wait for other people to help us, whether it's in a COVID situation or whether it is in any other situation, we are going to sit around and wait forever. We need to take charge of our own situation, and advocating and lobbying and spewing anger and that sort of thing is I suppose there's a place for it. But prove to the community that you are a worthy member of the community by going all out and not even considering your disability, but aim to be an integral part of the community. Talk to people, allow them to help you if they want to help you, but also show your independence because if it comes from you, it's going to earn the respect of other people, and you're going to integrate much easier. And in the COVID situation, you're going to get much more assistance and positive help than if you just passively lie around and wait for people to help you. And if they don't help you, start screaming and shouting at them. It just doesn't work that way. Thank you.